In this video, I will lead you through the steps for building your first pivot table. The results won't be very fancy, but you will see how easy it is to get useful information very quickly. I will use the dataset you see here. Each row represents a purchase by a customer from a fictional online retail store. The purchases start in March 2014 and extend through early October of the same year. The dataset is of moderate size, with 4,000 records. It is set up perfectly for pivot tables, with a number of categorical fields on the left and several numeric fields on the right. The company might want to break down any of these numeric fields by any of the categorical fields, such as total spent by customer region and/or purchase time. To start, make sure any cell in the data range is selected. Then click the Pivot Table button on the Insert ribbon. Note the Recommended Pivot Tables button to the right, introduced in Excel 2013. You can click this button to get an instant pivot table, but it might not be the one you want, so I won't illustrate this option here. When I click the Pivot Table button, it opens the dialog box you see here, where you must choose the data source and the location for the pivot table. For the data source, you can choose an Excel range or an external data source. If you have already created an Excel data model, you can instead choose this option. For now, I will choose an Excel range. Excel guesses at the correct range, and if the active cell is within the data range, as it is here, the guess is usually correct. Of course, you can change Excel's guess if necessary. Note that this range should include the labels in the top row of the dataset. For location, you can place the pivot table on an existing worksheet, starting in a designated cell, but you will often choose to place it on a new worksheet, as I will do here. You also have the option to add the current data to the data model. I will ignore this option for now. When I click OK, a new worksheet opens, which you can rename and move if you like. For some reason I've never understood, Excel places the new worksheet to the left of the datasheet. I think most people would rather have it to the right of the datasheet, so that's what I will do. This worksheet contains a blank pivot table on the left and a pivot table fields pane on the right. This fields pane is crucial, so the first thing you should realize is that if it disappears, it is easy to restore. Currently, the active cell is A3, and because it is inside the pivot table, the fields pane is visible. But if I select a cell outside the pivot table, the fields pane disappears. To get it back, all I need to do is select a cell inside the pivot table. You might also have noticed that when a cell in the pivot table is selected, two Pivot Table Tools tabs are visible, the Analyze and Design tabs. Actually, the Analyze tab was called Options in some earlier versions of Excel, but the functionality is basically the same. The ribbons associated with these tabs contain many useful pivot table options, and most of them will be discussed in later videos. Like the fields pane, these tabs disappear when the active cell is not inside the pivot table. The fields pane lists all data fields at the top, and it shows 4 areas at the bottom: filters, rows, columns, and values. Generally, you place categorical fields in the rows, columns, or filters areas, and you place numeric fields to be summarized in the values area. To start, I will check customer region and total spent in the fields list. The categorical customer region field automatically goes to the rows area, and the numeric total spent field automatically goes to the values area, where it is summarized by summing. You can see the results in the pivot table. For For example, the total spent for all purchases in the West is slightly more than $384,000, and the total spent in all purchases in all regions is slightly more than $2.6 million. As this example illustrates, when you check fields in the fields list, categorical fields automatically go to the rows area, and numeric fields automatically go to the values area. However, you can also drag a field to the area you want. I will drag customer gender to the columns area. Either of these methods leads to the pivot table where sum of total spent is broken down by region and gender. For example, the total spent by all male customers in the Midwest is almost $230,000. I now have a pivot table with useful results, but this is just the start. Later videos will illustrate how this pivot table can be modified in a variety of ways.